respected dignitaries, teachers, and dear friends. Now, we are on the first technical session of the two-day international webinar on the topic Women and Development, organized by Department of Economics, University of Kerala. Today, we have with us Dr. Sheeja S.R., Professor, Department of Economics, University of Kerala, to chair the session. Dr. Sheeja S.R. is a distinguished professor in economics, worked in the various government colleges of Kerala. She also served as the Vice President of Kerala Economic Association, Secretary at Kerala Economics Association Trust, and a life member of Indian Economic Association and Kerala Economic Association. With utmost pleasure and happiness, we welcome you, ma'am. We have three speakers with us for the session. Firstly, I welcome Dr. Nanditha Mathew, researcher, United Nations University Maastricht Economic Research Institute on Innovation and Technology. She will be sharing her findings on the topic Women on Board in India on paper and in practice. Before joining UNU Merit, Dr. Nanditha was a postdoctoral fellow at the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies in Pisa and at the National Research Council of Italy. In past years, she has done consulting work for the Asian Development Bank, United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and MEFOP in Rome. A well-acclaimed academician, she has published many research papers and is a recipient of several international awards. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am. We also have Professor Dr. Prasad A.K. and Ms. Anjana B.S., who will be jointly presenting their views on the topic Gender Disparity in Utilization Pattern of Time in Kerala. Professor Dr. Prasad A.K., the Director, School of Social Sciences, University of Kerala, is one of the most senior teaching faculty of the Department of Economics. He was also the former head of the department as well as the former Dean of Social Sciences. His areas of specialization are tribal economics and tribal development, socio-economic aspects of marginalized social sections, poverty and unemployment, and the development issues of Indian economy and Kerala economy. We cordially welcome you, sir, to the session. I also welcome Ms. Anjana B.S., Research Scholar, Department of Economics, University of Kerala, to speak on the session. It is Ms. Divyanjana, student, first year Economics, University of Kerala, who will be delivering the vote of thanks for the session. Welcome, Divyanjana. I invite all other dignitaries and the faculty members of the department who have joined the session. Last but not the least, I welcome all the participants who are present here today. You can raise your queries and doubts in the chat box and will be addressed in the end of the session. So with no further delay, let us move to the first technical session of the two-day international webinar. Once again, the Department of Economics welcomes you all. Thank you. Sheeja ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Ashna. Dear friends, good afternoon and welcome to the first technical session of the international webinar on women and development. As we all know, gender-based exclusion is one of the pressing concerns across the globe, and many studies have shown that sustainable development is impossible without gender equality and women empowerment. Therefore, gender equality is both a human rights issue and a precondition for sustainable development. We can say that it is one of the indicators of sustainable development also. So gender disparities, we know that gender disparity is prevalent across the cultures of the world, and without serious steps to tackle it, we cannot achieve sustainable development. A large number of studies have indicated that gender inequalities are extracting high economic costs and leading to social inequities around the world. Therefore, equal inclusion of women in all areas of development initiatives is of utmost importance. In this context, international webinar on women and development is extremely important, and I take this opportunity to congratulate the organizing secretary and my colleague Siddiq R for selecting this very relevant topic for as the theme of the international webinar. And I hope that the stimulating and thought-provoking papers in this session In this webinar will be documented the papers as well as the comments and interventions will be documented, and it will be brought out in the form of a book or a document, definitely, and that would be immensely useful for the policy makers while formulating policies on gender issues. And in this technical session, we have two papers. The first paper will be presented by Nanditha Mathew of United Nations University Maastricht Economic and Social Research Initiative on Innovation and Technology. And the topic of our presentation will be women on board in India. It's a very important topic. And the second paper is a joint paper, which is joint paper by Anjana B.S., who is a research scholar in the Department of Economics, and Professor A.K. Prasad, professor in the Department of Economics. The topic of their paper is Gender Disparity in Utilization Pattern of Time in Kerala. So first, let us start with Nanditha Mathew's paper. I request Nanditha Mathew to present the paper. Over to you, Nanditha.
Dick, for your kind invitation. I'm very happy to do this, even though it's online. I would have liked to be physically present there. So I think it's very important that you do this kind of webinars on women and development because we need to, let's say, bridge the gap between policymakers and academicians, and these kind of events are very important. So I work at the United Nations University. I'm a research fellow. I'm also the gender focal point of the United Nations University at Merit. So I work as a liaison between UN University and also other UN organizations like the UN Women to coordinate and integrate efforts on research on SDG 5, that's the gender equality. Today, I will present this work. It's a work in progress, even though I've sent you a draft. It's about women on corporate boards in Indian firms and what happens in practice and what is on paper. This is the short title. So, okay. So as you already know, SDG 5 is on gender equality on all spheres. So UN plays a lot of importance, not just on the equal participation of women and men in any kind of jobs, but also it puts special focus on jobs that involve this decision-making power, so decisive roles. So to give women greater voice in all the different spheres are important. So we spent a lot of time last year to come up with this draft where we are trying to do a big gender atlas at the UN, trying to map all the different research that is done on different parts of the world by UN organizations, and to see how SDG 5 interacts with other sustainable development goals. So, which also made us think how important the SDG 5 is. So it's each of the sustainable development goals, you cannot think of it by its own because it also interacts a lot with others. So for example, the other sustainable development goal on decent work will not be achieved if there is no decent work for women. The same is true for no hunger. The same is true for many other sustainable development goals. So it's very important that this is one of the pillar or one of the building blocks for other sustainable development goals as well. As Helen Clark at the UNDP pointed out, the international law recognizes that everyone has a right to participate in public life, but it remains an ongoing challenge to achieve women's equal participation, especially in decision making. So in many of the meetings or many of the, let's say, big events when there are policymakers involved, we really see that the number of women are very few. I have seen that sometimes I'm the only one when the group is small enough. So these are the things that have to be changed. And we are talking about women especially in this paper, we are talking about women in decisive roles. So as also Shija ma'am just pointed out, gender equality is not only about protection of human rights per se, but it's also about economic efficiency and economic development. The World Bank report in 2011, they already pointed this out, that the greater gender equality is also smart economics because it enhances productivity and improve other development outcomes. So it's important for, as I pointed out, for other sustainable development goals and overall economic growth. But this is not simply true only for the macro level, but also at a micro level, there are economic gains from increased gender diversity. When I talk about micro level, it can be firms, organizations, it can be government institutions. In any kind of an organizational setup, it's important to have diverse people in the decision-making process, because there are studies that have said that different genders have different viewpoint towards many aspects that involves decisions. So here, when I say micro level, I talk about firms. Firms in India. It covers both manufacturing and service sector. And I'm talking about decision-making jobs. So not at an employee level, not different levels of skilled or blue-collar jobs within organizations, but managerial positions or board positions. In the board of directors, how many women are there? This is the question that we are asking here. And there are advantages of having women on board. There are studies that have shown that there are advantages of having women on board. There are studies that show that women have a different kind of knowledge about customer market. So they have more intimate knowledge. They are more innovative. They are more socially and community minded. So for instance, a recent work that came out last year at the European Commission, they showed that in Europe, for the firms with higher share of women on board, they adopted much more green practices than the others. So just to give you an example. So overall, the gender diversity could bring in a different perspective to decision making. There are many studies that have looked at the share of women on board and firm performance, like the one that I just mentioned. However, it's not so easy to understand the causal relationship, especially, let's say in economic terms, especially when we are at an equilibrium state, when there is nothing changing in the sense. It's difficult to understand if high-performing firms hire women, or it's the gender diversity in the board that leads to high performance. Here, when I talk about high performance, it can be considered in a broad term, because there are studies that have talked about different aspects of performance. Like it can be growth, it can be hiring of employees, sales growth, it can be profits, it can be also environmental performance or innovative performance. There are works on all of these. However, as I said, it's very difficult to understand the causal link, especially when you don't have an exogenous shock. So here I try to take one of those kind of exogenous shock that happened in India to see how it affected the women participation. This is the exogenous shock that I'm talking about. So in India, there has been a new law in 2013, the Indian Companies Act, the revised one in 2013. It required at least one woman on corporate boards. So for specific certain, let's say, classes of companies, which I will explain in a bit, which are the companies that had to have a woman on board. So the question that we ask here is, has this law been successful in increasing the effective participation of women? So it's important to realize what is effective participation of women. I'm not saying, we are not interested in looking at if this law has been effective in making firms appoint a female director. If there's a law, they have to comply. So what we want to understand is if these new females that they have hired, how much do they participate in decision making? This is the interesting question that we have. Not if firms just comply to the law. On the first side, I look at if firms with a woman on board are different from other firms, to see if there is any kind of rationale behind not having a woman on board. This is the first part of the paper. And the second part, I check what happens after 2013. So I look at this separately for firms who already had a woman on board before 2013, and for the ones that hired their first female after 2013, because the second set of firms, likely they did that because of the law. So the government came up with the law, so they decided to have a woman on board. So we want to check the effective participation of women for the firms that already had a female before 2013 and for the ones after 2013. The first question on, okay, yes. Yeah. So before getting to the research question, let me explain to you how's the data. The data that I use is known to be, let's say, one of the biggest databases for Indian economy, where we can track firms in time. It's called as a Provis database compiled by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. And this data it has firms listed both on the National Stock Exchange and Bombay Stock Exchange. So it has the usual balance sheet data like sales, profits, investments, if the firm is innovating, how much they spend on R&D, exporting, so this kind of information. And then it also has information on the board members. So which is the information on the board members? It has the name of the board member, there's the number of board meetings attended of each board member, the remuneration, and also it has a director sitting fee, so how much you get per sitting. The data does not have explicit reporting of gender, so it doesn't tell you, okay, this person is a male or a female. However, it has initials. So before the name, there is Mr., Mrs., sometimes SMT, so Srimati, just to indicate which is the gender. So this helps us in understanding which is the gender. But this is not the case for all the data. Sometimes it's doctor. So then at that point, we have to do this manually. We have to check manually, which is the gender. And so after putting in the gender of all the directors, the total firms are around 3,000. And the time period is between 1990 and 2018. So the first question that, as I said, was interesting was to look at if firms with women on board are different from others. So we look at some firm characteristics. It's also based on previous literature. So we look at the size of the firm. I mean, are firms bigger than the other, are the firms with women on board bigger than their counterparts with only male on board? There is some literature on this. The idea that they point out that it's possible that they are bigger because when the firm gets bigger, they are more visible in public and they need to, let's say, show that they have a woman on board. And so it's more likely that the firms that are bigger have at least one woman on board. Another aspect is age, and the same with growth and profits. Basically, I look at growth and profits just to understand if there is any kind of difference in performance for firms with women on board. And then I also look at some aspects which kind of capture the risk-taking behavior. So you see that these are distributions of the variables that I just said now. The one below, I don't know if you see this. This is the one of size. We see that the black distributions are on the ones with female on board. It's slightly to the right, which means they are bigger firms. But other than size, we don't see any difference between the distributions. So the black distributions are the firms with female on board. The red ones are only male board. So the first two are for performance, like growth and profits. We don't see any difference. There are two distributions. You don't see it because it's really on top of each other, which means that there is basically no difference on performance if you have a female on board or not. So it kind of suggests that there is no reason not to have a female on board from the firm level perspective. Also, so as I said before, I also look at some other variables. Why? Because some literature points out that women on the board means the firm takes less risky investment. So they don't invest much, they don't borrow much. They're usually risk averse. This is one of the points that have been mentioned in some of the previous literature. So here, considering this, I look at like investments, borrowings, which are kind of proxies to understand how the firm behaves. And there is no big difference, but if at all there is a difference, we see that the female on board, the black distributions are slightly to the right, which means that they take more, they invest more. The firms with women on board also do more borrowings, which means these are to be invested. So overall, I would say from this that we don't see any big difference other than size, which means there is no reason not to have a woman on board. The plots that I showed you now was for before 2013. Now this is the shock that I was telling before. In 2013, there has been a change in the corporate law. So India introduced this mandatory quota for certain companies to have at least one woman on the board of directors. So which are these certain companies? One, every listed company shall appoint at least one woman within 1 year from the commencement. All public companies, so not only the first, but also the public companies, other than the listed ones that have a paid up share capital of 100 crore or more, or 300 crore or more, should appoint at least one woman director within the first 1 year from the commencement. And also to comply to these, maybe I can, okay, so to comply with this, they also had different timing. So for the firms that were already existing, they had to comply this within 1 year. However, for the newly incorporated firms, they had to do it within the 6 months. So in the analysis below, when I check the statistics, I look at it for each year separately. So maybe you will see that these effects take 1 year or two to come in practice. So the first thing that comes to one's mind is, has this law been effective in having more share of women on board? In developed countries, there is evidence, especially when one look at the last 20 years or so, that the share of women on corporate board have been increasing. I mean, this is a work for US, but the same has been seen also for several European countries. So what we want to see is that, has there been such a scenario in the Indian case? So this is a plot that shows the share of male and female directors. The yellow line here is the share of female directors, and the red one on top are the share of male directors. Now you see that after 2010, around 2013, there has been a slight increase, very slight increase, which is basically the law, the effect of the law, in the sense this plot just shows us that the firms have been complying, in the sense to the law, nothing more. In the sense, it's not that the share has dramatically increased, or and obviously it's a share, so when the female director increased, the red one is also slightly declining after 2013. Before being deceived by this plot, but again, it's a very slight increase, we have to understand that this is just showing that the firms have decided to have a woman on board. I mean, they are just complying with the law. What we want to see is the effective participation, as I said before. What are these women doing? For this, I thought it's important to check for firms who already had a woman on board before 2013 and for firms whose first appointment was after 2013. So this is the first category of firms where I look at the number of board meetings attended per director. So before 2013, the firms that had a female on board, the median values are very similar to the one of male. So the most frequent case, the most probable is that, because it's a median value, is not the average, because the extreme values could alter the average. We see that more or less both males and females, the most likely scenario is that they attend around 5 meetings per year. The maximum for males are very different. You see it's on the 20, 30s range, while for females it's on the 7 to 9 range. This is before 2013, and let's see what happens after 2013. So these are firms that have appointed their first female director after 2013. So just to comply with the law. You see that the median is very different. The median values of females is just 1 compared to 5 for males. And it's even dramatic that even the maximum is 1 for the first year. So these females are appointed, they are part of the board, but apparently they don't attend any board meetings, or let's say they are not actively involved in the decision-making process. And the median also in 2018, which is the last year of the database that we have, the median is still half of the value for males. And of course, the maximum is different. Now, we also check the remuneration. So there is a lot of literature that talks about the gender gap. And it's an issue that have been discussed by academicians, policymakers, social commentators, journalists, and it's an issue that is widespread across different countries. The gender gap is wider in developing countries and more close in developed countries. And there also has been a change, especially in developed countries, that the gap has been lessening, especially in US. So the causes of the gender gap, there are 2 main reasons that are cited. One is the human capital theory. The human capital theory basically say that women usually have responsibility, family responsibilities, or let's say childcare responsibilities. So they don't get the time to train or develop their skills, and so they have less skills. However, within the theory also, studies point out that there is also the prejudice that women doesn't have time, and so they don't invest in their skills, and so they are less skilled. So there is also the prejudice within this human capital theory. The other cause that is cited is the occupational segregation. The idea is that, or what they argue is that there are some jobs that are by nature low paid, and women tends to concentrate on this kind of jobs. So this is the other causes that have been cited. There are also other reasons that are country specific, region specific, location specific, that might contribute other than these 2 to this gender gap, the pay gap. However, as I said before, there is evidence, recent evidence, that this wage gap has considerably declined, especially in countries like the US. So we see what here I check what happens in the case of India, especially in the context of top positions and also in the context of the law, of the change in the corporate law. So these are salaries of board members for 2010. Here, let me explain again the distributions. The black one is of the female and the red one is of male board members. So we see that the female distribution just stop at around 17. These are log values on the x-axis. So the red keeps going on. So here are all positive values, while these are the lesser values. These are all higher values, let's say. You see that there's a lot more frequent that the males get much more, let's say, higher salaries than women. This part doesn't even exist for the females. However, the lower part is very similar in the sense that the lower part of the salaries, there are both males and females that get the same level of salary. This was for 2010, and let's see what happens in 2015. As you see, these two distributions are quite different. So the red one and the black one is really shifted, one to the left and the other to the right, which means that the red distribution kind of stochastically, like statistically, dominate the black one, which means the higher salaries of males are higher than the higher salaries of females, and the same with the lower case. So this means that the gap has further increased after 2013. But this, you have to think, or my guess is that the new appointed females after the 2013 law, likely firms decided to have a female on board just like a token, just to comply with the law, but they don't attend board meetings, and they are also paid very few. So these are the salaries that made these distributions likely to shift from one to the other, widening such a gap. So in the beginning, I started to talk about effective participation. Why effective participation is important? Because obviously when there is a law, there will be an increase in number from 0 to 1. This is just firms complying with the law. So we are not interested in looking at this obvious increase in number, but what are these females, how much decisive role do these females have in the board? How much of effective participation is there? This is the question that we try to answer here. And actually, we see that there is big difference in the participation of in terms of board meetings attended, especially after 2013. And also there has been a widening gap in the pay. Now, this doesn't mean that this law per se is not good. The idea, the point I want to put forward is that, are these laws enough to solve the problem of gender disparity on corporate boards? Especially in countries like India, where we have a complex social structure, the social norms play an important role. We need a lot of, let's say, different building blocks that will help these laws to be effective in practice. And so it's not important to have 1 or 2 laws here and there, but we need a systematic change. And one needs to think of what are the policies that can help in this direction, and how these policies will help in, let's say, improving the gender diversity or having more gender balance that go beyond such tokenism. That's what I would call, and also other literature have called, in corporate boards. I mean, this is not the case only of corporate boards, but this can be the case also of other institutions where there are this kind of policies without the supporting building blocks around it. And that's it. Thank you. I will stop sharing the screen, and I will take questions so we can have some discussion on this. Okay.
Thank you, Nanditha. By using Provus database of CMI, which is the largest database available within the country regarding the corporate sector, she has examined the role of women in decision making within the organizations. And I'm very happy to see that you have used Provus database to examine this. I myself have used Provus database for my PhD work. Actually, it was on it was related to the firm's performance impact of R&D or productivity, efficiency, etc. Then at that time, it was way back in 2004. I submitted my PhD thesis in 2004, and at that time I never imagined that Provus database will be used for examining the role of women in decision-making process. So being a woman, I'm very proud of you, Nanditha, for using Provus database for such an analysis. And
Thank you very much.
I think we can invite questions from the questions or comments from the participants. Now participants can raise your questions or comments.
Now we need to go for the question or the presentation of the other paper.
Oh, sorry.
What do you think?
Sorry, Siddhika, I forgot that.
Okay.
Now let us move to the second presentation. The second presentation.
Then we'll discuss about it, because otherwise, the other presenter may lose some time.
Okay, I forgot that. I had some phone calls in between. I forgot that.
Okay.
Let us move to the second presentation. It will be this is a joint paper by Anjana BS and Professor A.K. Prasad. I think Anjana is going to present the paper. The topic of the presentation is gender disparity in utilization pattern of time in Kerala. So, Anjana, are you ready for the presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Over to you, Anjana. Anjana, you can take 20 minutes. Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Good afternoon to one and all. I would like to thank Siddiq sir for giving me this opportunity. I'm here to present a paper entitled Gender Disparity in the Time Utilization Pattern in Kerala with special reference to unpaid work. This paper was jointly prepared by Dr. Prasad A.K. and me. Kerala is a state that displays excellent social indicators comparable to developed countries. Women outperforms their male counterparts in health, education, and many developmental indicators. But in case of work participation, the outcome is not favorable to women. It can be seen that the gender gap is widening over the period. The statistics depict a dismal picture of low female work participation rate. However, these figures do not mean that females are not working in the economy. Why is the work done by women is missing can be understood by looking at the activity classification of NSSO. It excludes persons doing works under codes 92 and 93, even though those works are really significant. The main characteristic of these works are it is not directly paid or remunerated. Since market is believed to be the hub of productive work, some important works get invisible or underestimated in the statistics. So a large part of missing labor is missing only from the official data, but is very much there in the labor force. In my presentation, I would like to point out the gender disparity in time utilization pattern and the significance of unpaid work. Unpaid work is the work which does not receive direct remuneration like cooking, cleaning, caring, etc. And very often it is women who do this kind of work and bear most of the burden. These domestic tasks are perceived as their primary responsibility under patriarchal norms. The society recognizes an individual's role in the economy when they participate in paid labor force, and unpaid work remain hidden and get trivialized. Also, the economic theories in the past failed to recognize unpaid work as a part of the mainstream economy. Classical economy stated that production is only in the market. Neoclassical did not consider unpaid work as economic good because it is considered as free and unlimited. Simon Kuznets, the father of national income accounts, also kept unpaid work outside the purview of national income. But the present generation economists, the heterodox economic school, emphasize link between institutional approach and feminist theory, and they accepted that domestic unpaid services are not just consumption, but they also represent production by household members. Also, unpaid work is not free because it has cost, and it is also not unlimited because there are limits on women's capacity to work and therefore is an economic good. The time use survey can capture the work, both unpaid and paid work. In my study, I have classified the activities into 9 categories. The first 3 categories pertain to SNA activities. SNA is an internationally agreed accounting technique for measuring economic activities of a nation. The extended SNA activities mainly include unpaid domestic work and caring services. The non-SNA activities is the third category. While analyzing the weekly average time spent by per person on paid and unpaid SNA activities, we can see that proportion of time spent by men on total SNA activities is greater than those spent by women. But while taking the extended SNA activities, we can see a clear-cut difference in the participation of female and male, with women shouldering greatest burden. We can see that these tasks are highly feminized. Male contribution to caring tasks is restricted to only few activities like teaching their children and accompanying children to places or adult members to different places. So women spend about 5 times more in extended SNA activities compared to men. So while combining SNA and extended SNA activities, women are found to be working for longer hours than men, which is in contradiction to the national or state statistics. So this is a very unequal distribution between women and men. What is important to note is that the predominance of women in this work is not a result of their free choice. The division of work between women and men is largely a social construct determined by patriarchal traditions and values. In fact, this highly unequal distribution is at the root of power relations and gender inequality. According to Human Development Report, development is defined as the process of expansion of choices in life through improved capabilities. And these capabilities such as education, nutrition, healthcare, etc. are developed not only by economic activities, but also by rendering attention in the form of cooking, serving, caring, etc., which are unpaid. These unpaid activities contribute not only to the current household consumption, but also to the future well-being and to community well-being. It also takes care of the depreciation of labor and enable male members of the family to go back to work the next day. It can be seen as a solid foundation for business sector, health sector, and education sector. By contributing their domestic work for free, they subsidizes the cost of care and salaries throughout the workforce, which sustains families, support economies, and often fills gap in public services and infrastructure. So this work is really what makes the society function and therefore an important component of the economy. But it does penalize women because taking on the bulk of this kind of work often carries a penalty in terms of not being able to have a full-time job with a decent wage and not being able to accumulate pension, not getting all of the benefits coming from formal sector employment. On the other hand, Full-time unpaid workers do not enjoy any upward mobility or promotions or retirement or pension. It is an unfair barrier to equal labor force participation rate and pay. The specter of patriarchy still looms over the state. Many respondents were not willing to trade domestic work for new employment opportunities. While extra income would be welcome, the long list of chores at home would not allow her to take up a job. It is generally considered that the welfare and happiness of a family depends upon the performance of domestic duties by women. So these structures should not be shaken or ignored. So women look for jobs in the informal sector where wages are low and benefits are near. It helps them in balancing household duties as well. In Kerala, a lot of married women who has completed BTech degree are engaged in work from home with relatively low salary. This implies that a significant part of the labor force in a given economy is locked into a low productivity kind of work. So the penalties are many, even though the benefits to society are huge. By not fully engaging women, the economy is misallocating resources and fails to take advantage of their full potential in the marketplace. It also misses the complementarity between women and men in the workplace. The result is lower productivity and economic growth. The IMF estimates that the GDP of a country can increase considerably if full potential of Indian labor force is tapped. Thus, gender gap in unpaid work is not just unfair but also inefficient. The non-SNA activities mainly meant for personal maintenance and development. The fairness witnessed in educating children, irrespective of gender, is clear from the figure. But men spend about double the time spent by women in social and cultural activities. So the burden of unpaid work impacts her ability to play an effective role outside home, perpetuating a gender skew in such activities. It can be seen that irrespective of regional differences, women devote significantly less time for personal care. While men get about 15 hours per day for personal enhancement, women get only 11 hours per day. The single most crucial indicator, as well as the result of huge burden of paid and unpaid work that women work, is lack of sleep. When asked a respondent what she would do if she had more free time, she replied, "Of course, I would sleep." And the study also found that employed women sleep for least amount of time, averaging nearly 5.5 hours per day, largely because they have to finish household chores before going out to work. So these unpaid daily tasks of women consume a substantial amount of time. It put a ceiling on the time that can be devoted for their personal care and development, and other household members seems to be free riding on unpaid labor provided by women. Domestic chores are often prioritized over personal well-being by women. So feminine time exists often in relation to the demand of time by others. There is also failure of women to recognize the continuing gender inequality they continue to face due to existing social division of labor. Even though women's literacy, education, and health standards are much higher than elsewhere in the country, the social transformation of Kerala over a prolonged period was highly uneven, and patriarchy in contemporary Kerala is apparent in generalized social commitment to women's domestic work. In my study, it is found that there is no significant difference between time spent on unpaid activities and the level of education. High level of education does not guarantee shorter work time on household activities, especially after the marriage. In spite of impressive levels of female education, women also act as a carriers of age-old patriarchal values. Generally, it is women who teach girls that it is their responsibility to do all household activities or restrict boy child from doing household tasks. So enlightenment or self-learning about their position in society, and the need for gender equality and women empowerment is as important as formal education to bring a fair space for women in the society. Also, it is found that no significant difference exists between time spent by employed and unemployed women on household activities. So, irrespective of occupational status, they have a major role to play in the household. The observation indicates that doing household activities is a must for women, and full-time or part-time employment in the job market does not reduce such burdens significantly. Indeed, women continue to struggle with the second shift impact, in which they come home from a long day at work and take on the unpaid labor of housework and childcare. But the double burden on women is often not addressed. Men who have female partner working in the home have an unfair advantage over women in the workplace who have no free labor at home tending to their needs. Combining paid work commitments with unpaid work are more likely to suffer from time poverty. Unpaid work is also seen as household overhead time, which is defined as the minimum number of hours a household needs to maintain and manage itself. In financially poor households, where more time is needed to process food, cook, clean, and so on, the HOT is very high. Experiencing acute time pressure undermines women's human rights since it undermines their ability to make choices. The immense burden of work is accompanied with little or no room for leisure and for acquiring human capabilities. Therefore, it prevents women from pursuing further education, employment opportunities, raising their skill level, and tending to their own well-being. So, in case of poor household, they suffer from both income and time poverty. The other major concern about the overburden of unpaid activities is the lack of time for rest and relaxation. The high-low variation based on gender is also seen in the time taken to eat and drink. Some of the respondents reported that they used to have meals within 5 to 10 minutes during weekdays so that they could finish other household duties. Sometimes they have no time to sit down for having meal and combine eating with other activities. For having children, for those having children below 6 years of age, told that they have to feed children along with themselves, and they often spend more time serving others rather than eating. So we can see that unpaid work has a very important role in the economy. Considering the importance of unpaid work, it is important to integrate the unpaid work in the macroeconomic policy. The exclusion of unpaid work, which is predominantly done by women, reflect the dominance of patriarchal values and bring male bias into macroeconomics. Neglecting unpaid work give a partial view of the economy, and the partial policy making result in several distortions at the macroeconomic level. For example, when public expenditure is reduced as part of the austerity measures, it tends to reduce the expenditure on health, education, and public services. This in turn tends to increase the burden of unpaid work on women. Similarly, during a slump period, when employment and income are falling, households tend to increase their unpaid work as a coping strategy by bringing some paid activities into household. And conversely, during a boom period, when employment and income are rising, households tend to reduce their unpaid work by taking this work to the market, as they can now afford to buy market services. So unpaid work is anti-cyclical. Given the limited capacity of women to give care, this implies that the economy tends to suffer from a care crisis during slump period unless government intervenes in a big way. So unpaid care work should be addressed systematically in policy making. Recognition, reduction, and redistribution of unpaid work is really critical. Recognition can be achieved by giving visibility to this work in national statistical system and appreciating its significance and making people aware about the value of work. Women have to realize and acknowledge as agents of development rather than recipients of welfare measures. Reduction in unpaid work in order to reduce the drudgery part of the work as well as the time stress of unpaid work can be done by providing infrastructure support, quality basic services, and time-saving technologies. The redistribution of unpaid work within the household requires changes in prevailing patriarchal norms and customs. It involves rethinking and redoing of our existing social relationships. The government may consider providing incentives to encourage the sharing of unpaid work by men, such as paternity leave, special incentives if men share childcare, etc. The redistribution of unpaid care between the other caregiving institutions such as voluntary sector, private sector, public sector can also be made by shifting some unpaid work to the mainstream economy. For example, providing early childhood education and care, taking care of elderly and sick, etc. Since women traditionally do much of the unpaid work, neglecting to include it underestimates women's contribution to the economy. So, time has come to incorporate unpaid work into labor market analysis and in the design of realistic labor and employment policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjana, for the thought-provoking paper. Now, participants can raise your questions or comments or share your views.
Hello. Can I ask a question, Nanditha?
Yes.
This presentation, and in fact, we are so grateful that you accepted our invitation and had given a presentation, especially in this area. So I guess it is one of the first of its kind. So while we ensure, my question is the following: while we ensure the representation of women through law, your study shows that the remuneration and the status of women as a decision maker is not significantly come up. And what mechanism perhaps bring this issue being resolved? Because this is a legality which made the women into the board. And now what extension of the legality is in fact, ensures such a sort of an improvement in the women in board? And do you think that the legal provisions or extension of legal premise improve this? I think there is a lot of scope in working over this particular aspect of, that particular aspect of the law, especially the corporate law. That I have hardly seen anybody who had worked on it. So it would be great if something you can reflect on it. And then the second question I would like to ask is, can you, elaborate a little bit on the regional variation regarding the incorporation of women in board, because that is also part of your work. So it's within that, one more, let me come. Yes. Within that, do you think that whether there is any regional bias in terms of incorporation of women in board and their social recognition exists in their respective region? So not the country as a whole, because under the constitution, we are all under the constitution. So we have no segregation or discrimination which ensures under the constitution, but still we do have this difference under a very secular constitution. So in that context, you can't simply say that within the context of the constitution, but I am asking, this is in the context of the regional variation, which is persisting and prevailing all across the country. So please have your own.
Yeah. So
for Anjana, one second, I also have a question. Anjana, Nanditha, is there any difference between the level of education between men and women in the board? Could you find any difference between the level of education? That is my question.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question also to Nanditha?
Yes.
Hello, I'm Christabel from University of Kerala. When it comes to the board of directors, we know that they are the key decision makers of a company, and they are elected to represent the shareholders. So from that context, when we look at that composition, what you have rightly said is that the number, even if you take the global figure, they are less than 17%, and when it comes to the board chair, it is less than 5%. That kind of data we can see. In continuation of what Professor Shija has asked, whether it is the lack of qualification which made this representation low. That is first question. Second one, some years back in future studies, we did a study on the board of directors. What we have found is that, the board, the members who are the members in one board will be the members in other board. So the multiple kind of membership will be there. Okay, so the person who will be in different boards, the same person will be there in the different boards, and that kind of issues will be there, because if that is the case, the total representation need not be going up. The same person will be appearing in different boards of the different corporates. Okay, so that is, have you come across that kind of any pattern in terms of females are concerned? Yet another thing which I want to know is that what is the composition? I don't know whether the data give you that that kind of information, because when it comes to the women board members, whether there is any composition in terms of education, in terms of their locational background, as Siddiq has rightly asked. So I also would like to know about it. Yet another issue which I have seen is about the higher the salaries. When the women are given higher salaries, the men are given much more higher salaries than that of the women board members. So is it because whether the bargaining power of the men is going up compared to the females when they are appointed in the board? So I feel that kind of a doubt. I'm not sure about it. You may answer that thing. And I'm curious about the methodology you have used, that kernel density. So what is the reason why you selected this methodology rather than going for some other kind of modeling or correlation kind of statistical tools? So I would like to hear from you. Thank you.
Can I answer one by one? Okay, so first of all, to Siddiq, he was asking, the first question was what can be done given that the policy of Indian Companies Act is not really helping in effective participation of women. One major doubt I have, and this is something I need to check if I can actually check with the data, is to understand if these board members are family members of other board members. In the sense, for example, if I look at the top firms like Reliance, they have Rita Ambani in the board, but this is possible that once there's a change in law, they decided to have someone just for the name, so it is possible. This could help in understanding why there is no active participation as well. Maybe this will help in explaining. And if this is the case, I think this is something that can be done within the law, in the sense one could make the amendment saying that one cannot have people involved in family, but it's not so easy to decide this. However, my point is, I am not sure if another law is what we need here, but or law specifically that matters to corporates. But as I said, that we need all the different building blocks surrounding it. So this is what matters. And on the regional side, so I did this. If you have the draft with you, you will see that I didn't talk much about it because the regional part just reflects the human development indicator, which just shows that the data is kind of representative. That's all, in the sense it kind of correlates with the other human development indicators when I look at the share of women. On the change of the corporate law, it's still to be checked. I didn't check if there is a bias. Another issue is also that there are few firms of course, when you look at statewide. So this is another, it could have a bias in this respect. To come to the question on the level of education that Shija was asking. So I don't have information on the level of education per se, but I tend not to believe that in India, with how many people are we? I think we do have enough females with that level of education to compete for the board of directors. So it is possible that the level of education of the hired board member is different, but this might also connect to my answer before. It is possible that the new hired are family members or friends or relatives, and so maybe this is not based on merit. This is one possibility. But however, I don't think, because here we are talking about corporate board, so we are talking about like even 200 women would do to fill in this, to bring up the share up. And I believe that we have those kind of the resumes that can be mapped with existing male board members. So I don't think this is the issue. But as you said, it is possible that the ones they hire have a different skill level. This is one possibility. And coming to the other, this also kind of answers the lack of qualification, the question that was put by Christabel on that the board members in the end represent the shareholders, and it's possible that the lack of qualifications. Again, this will again come back to the discussion on the hiring strategy, so, or whom you appoint as a female director. And it is possible that there are multiple members on board, and the same board member can be in the board of different corporates, but this shouldn't actually matter per se, because we are looking at for each firm, we compute for each firm the composition. So this shouldn't, let's say, alter much or bias much the results, because the averages are considered for each firm. If there is one woman who is in different boards, this could be something that can be checked, but still the bias would be on the opposite side. It would still show that there is much more gap. So I don't think this should be an issue. And on the salaries, what I believe is that one thing could be the bargaining power. Of course, maybe men has high bargaining power. Then it is possible that due to other responsibilities, family or childcare or many responsibilities, females are not able to actively participate. So we see that the maximum number of board meetings attended by males and females are different, and so their salaries are different. This is one possibility. However, the results are same also for director sitting fees, which means the amount they receive for each sitting for the meeting. Also, this is quite different. As I said, there are studies that point out to different reasons as to why such gap is there for salaries. One could be the prejudice that women are less skilled than men. This could be one reason. And on the last question on why I used kernel density plots. So the idea was actually here, I don't do any kind of regression analysis or anything. I just look at the statistics, simple statistics. A possibility and good extension could be to use something more complex, like a regression discontinuity approach to have a proper impact evaluation. The problem to study many aspects with gender is there also here, that we don't have a decent control group. There are very few women. This is the problem with all the studies that are done everywhere, that you cannot have a decent empirical approach because we have so few females that the number is so few that it's difficult to have big empirical things with big data. But still, the kernel density plots actually helps in understanding how the top performers are different. It kinds of separates all the different groups, you know. So let's say the highest paid men are more paid than the highest paid women. This kind of analysis we can see with the kernel density plots. The low paid women are still lower than the low paid men. This was interesting. And this is why I used the kernel density plots, because we can compare each, let's say, different categories within the whole distribution. So this is difficult to see with an average or with other numbers. So this was the idea. And I think I have answered. I can actually show, if you want, there is the regional, the plot that I made for different regions. But let me see if I can share the screen. Yes. Wait. No. Do you see? They're about to zoom. Hello?
We can see it. We can see it.
You can, do you see that? Okay.
Yeah, the map we are watching.
Yes, okay. So actually this is just a share of women on board. There are some differences. I mean, again, here, there could be a bias on how many firms there are in each state. It's not so obvious, but it correlates a bit with other indicators on gender. Kerala is, however, not doing great with respect to. I would have expected more. So the higher the color, the darker the colors, the more share of women on board. The lighter the colors, if it's 0, then it's mostly white. So I didn't show this in my slide simply because it just showed how representative is the data, which is not particularly interesting. To have, I don't know how to stop the screen. Okay, yes, okay. So to have, again, more analysis at the regional level, what we need is a lot more females, because we need data. We need the control group, otherwise we can't do much. So after 2013, firms started to appoint female, but it's still just one. It's the differences between 0 to 1. This still doesn't help much in understanding. One could try to do more sophisticated analysis using regression approaches, but at a country level, at a region level, this will be a bit difficult. Yeah, that's it. I think I've answered all the questions, but other questions, just put in the chat box. I think there's a question to Anjana.
Yeah.
That is Ranjana. Anjana? There is a question in the chat box.
Yes,
Yes, Anjana, you have a question in the chat box. What is your opinion about practicality of payment to women who are doing household chores?
Practicality of payment to women who are doing this households.
That is the
for women belonging to the age group 40 years and above, it would be good because it would be difficult for them to acquire new skills. But for the younger woman or for future generation, it would create a negative effect because some women would prefer to remain unemployed because they are getting this payment, and it can waste their productive years, and so it is not a long-term solution, and it is not going to give much positive gain for the economy or for that for the future generation. And if the husband is giving the money, recently there was a discussion that husband should give money to their wife, but if husband is giving money to women without changing the attitude towards this unpaid work, or without changing the attitude towards this work as feminine task, then it can worsen the situation because now they feel like a boss-employee relation. So the husband and his family could demand more from wife and can become more authoritative and treat like a worker. And another important factor is nowadays, even we can, in many families, we can see that employed women give their salary to husband. So I don't know how much it is practical. And first and foremost, you have to make them aware that it is not a feminine task, and that you should change the attitudes towards unpaid work, and you should share the work, household activities, and caring activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjana. Is there any other question? Question or any comment?
Good afternoon. Can I ask a small clarification to Anjana? Yeah. What kind of data you have used? Is it a fieldwork based data or some secondary data? Because I didn't get throughout the presentation. So some of the graphs you have mentioned, no? So that data you collected, or you have taken some secondary level analysis?
I conducted primary level survey. I used the time use survey analysis.
Okay, is it a NSS survey, that time survey?
No, I conducted a primary survey.
Okay.
I used the time use survey method.
Okay, is it a Kerala, all Kerala kind of state survey, or some specific area where you have focused?
I did the study in 3 districts in Kerala.
Oh, okay.
In Thiruvananthapuram, and in the mid Kerala, and in the northern Kerala.
Okay.
Is there any question? Any other question?
Can I ask a quick?
Yes.
Thank you to Anjana. I was wondering, it's more of just a chat question, let's say. It's more of a question on how do you think the emerging technologies will help women in changing their household chores? Or let me put it differently. So when we look at the previous generations, they did not have, let's say, washing machines or other dishwasher machines and stuff. So which one do you think will be faster, that emerging technologies will help women with their household chores, or more of a social acceptance where men will take half of the share of the household chores? Which one do you think will be faster?
Of course, the sharing of the work by men and women will be the faster, will be the effective way. But I don't know whether it is a faster way of
No,
faster.
I agree. I agree. Effective way. I was just asking if you have a prediction on what will happen in practice faster. Will the technology help the woman to get out of their household chores before men, before we have a social acceptance, because the social acceptance tend to take a lot of time apparently. So maybe technology is the savior than the change.
But still, at the end of the day, the women are, even if technology take over, but still at the end of the day, the share and the composition of women who's doing is actually going to be intact in that sense. So that is, I don't think that is a kind of a radical change, though technology replaces many of the work. But still, if you say the quantum of work and vis-a-vis the kind of an involvement of technology, it is only easing the work, not actually releases women from the kind of burden which is she undergoes. So I don't think that the other one is more acceptable than.
Yes, if you wait for 10 years, maybe yes.
No, I don't think that time.
Rhetorical one,
I
it's
understand.
like, will there be more equality before that stage when robots will start doing the work at home?
Yes, no, I would say that no, it is a kind of an attitude and raising issues also. For example, if you are from Europe, maybe your partner may not be feeling bad to cook as well as wash dishes. But in Kerala, even if you are ready, but there are social constraints, even you are educated and other kind of things. So
exactly.
Completely different. So it is a kind of an attitude which we need to nurture. And these days things are, I think we need to, give more priority in that. Of course, even if technology comes, the men will supply technology and they get out. They also equally get a lot of technological support to ease their work. So in that sense, I don't think that the work is being shared. That sharing would be the more caring than the other way around. Simply.
Yeah. I mean, it was more of a question with a sarcastic note, in the sense, when will the change happen? Is it before robots come to our homes? Will it happen in India? This was the question. But
one more question. There is one more question. Nanditha, can you see it in the chat notes?
Yes, I'm just reading it now. Thank you, Parvati, for the question. You're totally right. So there are a lot of social norms that are surrounding that we are surrounded by, and that's why I was saying we cannot think of one policy that might help. That is not it's not like fever and you give paracetamol and you fix it. And that's exactly what we see in this law. So we need a lot of, on one side, to have role models, or to have women performing well in bigger decision roles, play some kind of, have a social impact on females, having, okay, I can also do it kind of feeling. This is there. But on the other side, indeed, social norms are huge, and it's much more complex in developing economies, because developing economies, there is much more heterogeneity. I mean, for us, each states are different, and also within the states, as much as there is income inequality, the same is also with social development. There are people with broad mindset, but there are also people with very backwards mindset. So this is indeed, it contributes. The challenge is how to overcome this, right? The challenge is this. And as you rightly said, this is one of the important matter. And what should change is this culture, not only on corporate, but also everywhere else, but also, and which kind of policy can help is a big question. One could be, as I was pointing out also as an answer to Siddiq's question before, is to check if these new women that are hired after the new law are family members or relatives, just to have them on the board. This might change in the sense, if you have if you have a woman that are competing, that are able to compete with the other board directors, then she could also have some kind of empowerment where she can bargain her salary, she has more bargaining power in terms of decision and in terms of remuneration. So you're right, but we need a set of institutions around this to change, and one law just doesn't help.
Now it's time for winding up the session. Thank you, Anjana and Nanditha, for your enlightening and thought-provoking presentations. I would like to thank Siddiq Rabiat for giving me an opportunity to chair this session. Also, my thanks to the participants for your timely interventions and cooperations. Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Yeah.
So now we are moving on to the end of the session. I invite Ms. Divyanjana to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening to one and all. On this occasion, it is indeed my pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the Department of Economics, University of Kerala. I take this opportunity to express my gratitude to respected Dr. Sheeja S.R., Professor, Department of Economics, University of Kerala, for chairing this session. Thank you, ma'am. I would like to thank Dr. Nanditha Mathew, Researcher, United Nations University, Maastricht Economic and Social Research Institute on Innovation and Technology, for presenting the paper on women on board in Indian firms on paper and in practice. We were enlightened by her views on gender diversity in decision making and the advantages of having women on board. It provided an insight on the importance of gender balance in the corporate sector. Thank you, ma'am. Next, I extend my gratitude to Ms. Anjana B.S., Research Scholar, Department of Economics, University of Kerala, and Professor Dr. Prasad A.K., Director, School of Social Sciences and Professor, Department of Economics, University of Kerala, who expressed their views on the topic gender disparity in utilization pattern of time in Kerala. Their presentation gave us details about the gender gap in work participation rate in Kerala and also highlighted the significance of unpaid work by women in households. Thank you. I also thank Ms. Ashna Elizabeth Koshi for the welcome address. From the bottom of my heart, I would like to thank all the participants and audience of this session who made remarkable participation and made this session active and successful. Thank you, everyone.